Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Quaranta, President of the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar program this morning on the Healthy Delaware Families Act. We've got a lot of attendees and a very, very
Hey, Mark, I decided to take
terrific panel. And so would like to remind everybody, one, this is an on-the-record conversation. Two, just for safety's sakes, if everybody out there can mute themselves, that's terrific. And that way we'll get through this with very little interference, if at all. Let me thank all the panelists, but let me start by thanking Michelle Ray from Blackwell HR Solutions as our sponsor today. Michelle, take it away.
Great, thank you, Mike, and good morning to everyone. My name is Michelle Ray, and I'm the CEO of Blackwell HR Solutions, and we're a proud sponsor of today's webinar. As a company that offers human resources advisory and consulting to small businesses across the state of Delaware and the Mid-Atlantic area, we're grateful to the State Chamber for putting together this important event. We look forward to hearing from today's panel and are available to help any organization with their human resources needs. Back to you, Mike.
Great, thank you very much. And thanks to you, Michelle and Blackwell. Also want to thank, we're doing this in conjunction with the DelMarVa SHRM and Delaware Employer Council. And with that, I want to turn this over to Kristen Evans, who's president of DelMarVa SHRM, for a quick welcome. Kristen.
Thank you so much, Mike. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for attending today. As Mike mentioned, my name is Kristen Evans. I am the current DelMarVa SHRM president and the SHRM State Council board member, as well as serve as a board member on the Delaware Employer Council. For those of you who may not be aware, DelMarVa SHRM is a professional human resources group. It's proud to be affiliated with the Society for Human Resources Management, SHRM. The group facilitates presentations regularly throughout the year on various topics of interest to HR professionals and local small businesses. Their mission is to serve local businesses and keep local management abreast of current events and topics. The Delaware Employer Council is a group of business professionals initially established in collaboration with the Delaware Department of Labor in the 90s. They also sponsor and facilitate presentations on various subjects of interest to HR and local businesses and professionals. We're so pleased to be co-sponsor for this training today and to have an opportunity to provide input and to be an integral part of contributing into healthier and less stressed employees and family members. Mike, thank you again so much for allowing us to be a part of this. I eagerly turn this back over to you to introduce our speakers and to continue the presentation.
Great, thank you, Kristen. That's terrific. And also, just so we've got a blend of members of the media. We've got, I know, some folks in the business and also in the public sector who are listening in today. Some people who are HR professionals. Thanks to the good folks with the organizations that Kristen and Jackie Poquette, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, have helped navigate us through, and a credit will be available for this program, and that code will be up at the end of this webinar later today. So let's get into it. Let me introduce our speakers today, our panelists. We have Delaware Secretary of Finance, Rick Geisenberger. We've got Delaware Secretary of Labor, Karryl Hubbard. We've got Senator Sarah McBride. And we have Jackie Poquette, who's Director of Delaware SHRM State Council, and Albert Shields, who's the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy for Governor John Carney. So their bios are all available on the invitation and on the promotional stuff. So without further ado, I want to turn this over to Senator McBride. Before I do, I want to a couple of things. We've had multiple conversations with the senator, and we are truly grateful for literally the hours that she has spent with me and Tyler and our team in particular, and I know she's done that with others, and we're grateful. Similarly, I've had long conversations with Albert Shields from the governor's office. So the conversations have been helpful. And so that's just part of the policy process. Senator did offer a substitute to the original introduced version of this bill. And so if you are focusing on the bill that was introduced in 2021, you're not looking at the most current version of this bill. She introduced a substitute in January of 22, And so I just want to make sure that everybody level set, that everybody knows there's a different document. So without any further comment on my part, an important topic, one where employer interests, employer needs, employee life events all kind of come together. Senator, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, and good morning, everyone. I want to start by thanking you, Mike, the Chamber, DelMarVa SHRM, for facilitating today's conversation, and to everyone who's joining us today to learn more about the Healthy Delaware Families Act. I know we've got a lot of questions that we'll be getting to during the course of the conversation, but just to set the table, I introduced the original version of this legislation that Mike mentioned last year, because I believe that modernizing our economy by establishing a paid family and medical leave insurance program lies at both the heart of our public health and economic recovery. To just summarize, the legislation before us now creates a statewide paid family and medical leave insurance program, providing partial wage replacement to eligible Delaware workers out on leave to welcome a child into their family, seek treatment for a serious health condition, take care of a family member with a serious health condition, or a military family adjusting to the deployment of a loved one, essentially the same, actually identical qualifying events to the federal FMLA law. The insurance program would be funded by a payroll deduction of 0.8%, split between the employer and employee, equaling about $4 for every $1,000 of wages paid. And employers can choose to use either the statewide insurance program or a private plan or policy that meets or exceeds the state floor. Now, currently 9 states plus DC have passed similar programs, with surveys of employers in the states with operationalized programs reporting positive outcomes. In New York and New Jersey, 71% of small businesses said that they were supportive of their state's paid leave programs after experiencing them. In another state, more than 90% of businesses reported that paid leave has either had no impact or a positive impact on their bottom line, with small businesses even more likely than larger businesses to report those positive, not just neutral impacts. These statewide programs also serve to level the playing field in the competition for talent between larger and smaller employers. This is an increasingly in-demand benefit, and we'll talk more about that, which is why more larger companies are providing it on their own dime. But without a statewide insurance program that reduces costs and offers this benefit at the most economical rate, many small and medium-sized businesses struggle to provide the benefit on their own. And finally, at a time when we are facing a worker shortage, something I certainly have heard time and time again from employers throughout these conversations, we also know that paid leave is actually a proven strategy to increase workforce participation, both overall, but especially among women and older workers. And as Delaware seeks to keep and attract young workers, really, I think at the heart of the future of our state's economy, paid leave will make Delaware a more attractive state to live, work, and raise a family in. Now, despite the success of those programs in other states, over the last year, as Mike has talked about, I've engaged in really well over 100 hours of conversations with stakeholders in and out of government, including individual business owners, business groups, and local and state chambers. And as a result of those conversations, I've introduced a substitute bill that makes several meaningful changes that would make Delaware's program of the 9 other states the most restrained program in existence. Those changes include, but are certainly not limited to, a significant lengthening of the eligibility threshold for an employee to access the benefit, from earning $2,500 in Delaware from any employer in the original bill to at least a year and 1,250 hours worked with a specific employer, the same as FMLA. We've limited the covered relationships from a much more expansive list in the original bill for family caregiving to just child, spouse, and parent, the same as FMLA. We've reduced family caregiving and medical leave, the most common type of leave taken, from 12 weeks annually to 6 weeks within a 2-year period. And we've made the unprecedented edit among those 9 states plus DC from covering all private employers to exempting with an opt-in option employers under 10 employees for parental leave and employers under 25 employees for medical and family caregiving leave. So in short, this compromise legislation both meets critical needs for workers while incorporating meaningful feedback from employers, creating a balanced approach that will make Delaware more competitive and more compassionate at the same time. And so I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. I'll turn it back over to Mike to introduce Jackie.
Great. Thank you very much, Senator. Appreciate those comments. So let me now turn over the microphone to Jackie Poquette. Jackie, you're a professional in this space. Opening thoughts and comments, please.
Thank you. Good morning. It is my pleasure to be here today to speak with you about the Healthy Delaware Families Act from an HR perspective. The Society for Human Resource Management's, or commonly known as SHRM, mission is to create better workplaces where employers and employees thrive together. As such, it encourages businesses to voluntarily offer paid leave and flexible work options to their employees. Government mandates like the Healthy Delaware Families Act limit employer flexibility. SHRM also acknowledges that employers are now finding themselves forced to navigate a fragmented patchwork of state and local paid leave laws, resulting in a significant compliance burden. Meeting compliance and reporting obligations takes a lot of time and resources and can be confusing for even the most knowledgeable individual. For example, the Healthy Delaware Families Act contains different eligibility and application criteria than those found in the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993, known as the FMLA. Understanding when an employee becomes eligible for which set of leave benefits, and then allowing potentially greater absenteeism due to benefits beginning at different times for different employees are just some of the complications employers face due to employee leave eligibility discrepancies. In addition, the Healthy Delaware Families Act does not address the handling of intermittent absences, particularly when paid leave benefits are used for child bonding time. Permitting employees to start and stop work on an intermittent basis, specifically in the context of bonding with a new child, can create major disruptions in the workplace. Now more than ever, employers are struggling to meet the demands of their businesses as they offer the competitive paid leave programs and flexible work arrangements necessary to attract and retain employees during a national crisis. As HR professionals, we strive to develop attractive, cost-effective employee benefit plans that meet the needs of the company and employees alike. We understand that a well-designed paid leave program can have a measurable effect on employee productivity and satisfaction. A government mandate, such as the Healthy Delaware Families Act, imposing a one-size-fits-all policy on businesses, takes some of the choice away and creative ideas for providing paid leave, such as paid time off purchase plans that allow workers who want more leave to purchase additional paid time off, either through employer flex credits or salary reductions with pre-tax dollars will no longer be available, thereby limiting our much needed flexibility. Thank you.
Jackie, thank you for that. I'm going to go to our questions now, and I would like to remind our panelists we've got, and also let me say to all the listeners and viewers today, we got a lot of questions. There will be a lot of technical questions that we're going to have to get to. I'm going to ask Secretary Hubbard later if this were to become public law, that we schedule something like this with her department to think through a lot of the different scenarios, different practicalities of something like this, if this were to become public law. Because I've been in the policy making world in Congress and here my whole life. Legislation never addresses every single potential scenario. Never seen it happen ever. It won't ever. It can't, but that's why there are departments and agencies that implement things like this. So, you know, we'll turn to the Secretary at some point, but would hope that we could have a session like this, if this were to become law and the governor were to sign it, that we could kind of go through on a more specific basis as those kinds of policies would be created to implement a new public law. I'm going to go to Senator McBride first. So Senator, take us back a bit. I know there was a personal experience that you've shared that with a lot of audiences over time, but let's talk about data. Survey data here shows that a lot of employees think about wages. They think about flexibility in the workplace. If they got to meet, the Maytag repairman, the cable guy, pick up a sick kid from school. Those are some of the things they value. They worry about their health care. This isn't one that has risen as a topic typically through employee surveys. So what was the data that led you to believe that this was an issue that led to the proposal that you've introduced in the Delaware State Senate?
Sure, I appreciate that conversation. And as you mentioned, I think like many have personal experience, but really I try to be driven by data as I legislate, and certainly driven by what I hear in the community and across the state as a legislator. So first, just to sort of level set in terms of what the current reality for benefits are in non-paid leave states, including places like Delaware. What we know is that according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, overall, just 25% of firms offer paid parental leave, either maternity, paternity, or both, to at least some employees for the birth or placement of a child. 35% of workers are employed at those 25% of firms that offer some sort of paid leave. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics from the U.S. Department of Labor, in the Mid-Atlantic region, and Jackie just mentioned a couple of different other elements of leave, paid sick time, for instance, that would still absolutely be allowable under this law. But what we're looking at here are sort of policies that are equivalent to either short-term disability insurance coverage, right? Coverage for medium to longer-term leave for serious health conditions, or for those longer-term, medium to longer-term parental leave. In the Mid-Atlantic region, 40% of workers had access to a short-term disability insurance policy, and 23% of workers had access to a paid family and paid family leave benefit. So that's family caregiving or parental leave. And in Delaware, according to the National Partnership, that number is about 352,000 workers in Delaware do not have access to paid family leave. Now, what I'll also say is throughout my campaign and throughout my time in office now, I consistently hear from folks that this is a policy that they care about, that these life events are happening. And in an increasingly, in a world with increasingly two-income households, these types of flexible policies to allow workers to fulfill care responsibilities and still participate in the workforce are increasingly in demand, which is why Ernst & Young found that more than 70% of Gen Xers and millennials said that paid leave was an important part in a job choice. And another survey found that more than 30% of workers said that they'd be willing to move significant distances specifically for paid leave policies. So we've got data that reflects both the reality on the ground in terms of the lack of policies that address these medium to long-term leave needs, and the data that shows that this is very much an in-demand benefit. 38% of respondents in a survey from the Bipartisan Policy Institute, 38% of unemployed workers responded that they would be significantly more likely to return to work sooner if they were provided paid family leave policies. So again, data point after data point does suggest that this is an increasingly in-demand benefit. Now, of course, there might not be formal complaints about a lack of these policies because there isn't a law that requires these types of policies to be provided. So there's not going to be formal complaints on the board with the Department of Labor or the state chamber of an employer not providing something that the employee is legally required to be able to receive. But we know from the data this is in demand and that there's a lack of the benefit. And then finally, I'll just say, since introducing this, not a week goes by that I don't hear from a family that's struggling through major life events without this kind of financial support. A family that I went to high school with, their infant child was just diagnosed with very serious cancer, and both parents had to quit their jobs in order to take care of their child. And now they're fundraising online to make up for lost wages because the care for their child is so all consuming that it's requiring both of them, both of their time and attention. And so anecdotally, I certainly hear what that data reinforces. And so that all came together for me to decide that this was a necessary policy to pursue. And then in looking at that positive data that I mentioned in my opening comments, I saw that paid leave programs are highly effective both for employers and employees in managing these inevitable life events. And as I mentioned, the proposal that we now have before us, which is I think a little bit different than what was described in Jackie's comment, is very flexible. In fact, it's the most flexible of those 9 states plus DC that have statewide insurance programs. And that's reflecting the feedback that we've heard from employers.
Great. Thank you, Senator. Appreciate that, the contours of your answer there. Secretary Geisenberger, I'm going to go to you next because the funding formula here is important. Take, if you will, just a minute to talk about, I think everybody that is participating today understands the basis of the formula, the percentage, the division between employee contribution and employer contribution. How will adjustments, if this were to become law, how would adjustments to that funding formula be made in the future? And what metrics, what's the frequency of the potential change, and what metrics would be tied to any adjustments in the future? There's a potential that the numbers, there could be a number of people who might never access this benefit. There are 10,500 plus births typically in a year in Delaware, according to the CDC, for data last time available, which was 2019. Of course, that doesn't include fostering and or adoption, but what are you're on mute, but what are your thoughts? If you want to come off mute.
So, well, I'll describe how it works. I can certainly respond to that. I mean, I do want to thank the sponsor for working with us to address some of the many, if not all, of the competitiveness concerns that we had as the administration was looking at this. And I do agree with her that that the, you know, we've been trying to craft something that is, you know, more flexible, responsive to business concerns, much more linked to the Federal Medical Leave Act, frankly, than any other state that has this. We looked at every single state that has this or is going to adopt it, and we looked at the tax rates relative to those states and the benefits relative to those states. And there's no doubt here that this is certainly in that, you know, in the ballpark of reasonableness, and certainly more flexible than other states. So payroll contributions would start January 1st, 2025. Benefits would first be eligible at the beginning of 2026. The contribution rate, we added a cap so that it doesn't go above the Social Security cap, which in 2022 is $147,000. The tax rate is really made up of 3 different pieces that adds up to 0.8%. There's a 0.4% tax rate for medical leave benefits, 0.08% for family caregiving, and which includes military exigency leave when somebody is called up to the National Guard or to go overseas, and then 0.32% for parental leave benefits. That all adds up to 0.8%, which can be split 50-50 between the employer and the employee. But if the employer wants to pay more of that 0.8%, they can choose to do that as a benefit for their employees. They can also have a comparable plan, which I think is very important to point out. If they have a comparable plan, they're not subject to any payroll deduction or you know, participation in all of the pieces of this. And obviously that's our biggest hope, is that we do think a lot of employers already have comparable plans. So we looked at the rates of the other 10 states. These rates are very much in that ballpark. So in terms of adjusting them in the first 2 years, 2025 and 2026, it's a fixed number. Then beginning in 2027, the rate would adjust. Again, I want to thank the sponsor. She agreed to a provision that I don't think any other state has, which is an absolute cap on the rate. so that when we make these adjustments, it will never go above 1% in total. And if the formula would cause it to need to go above that in order to maintain the benefits would actually decrease. So instead of 80% of the benefit of someone's wages up to $900 per week, that 80% could drop to 75%. It could keep dropping if the tax weren't sufficient to at a 1% rate to raise enough money. So what will happen is each year, the Secretary of Labor will take a look at all of the payments from the prior year, all of the benefits that were paid, all of the costs of administration, and we'll do a calculation that it can't exceed 125% of that number, inclusive of any carryover from the prior year. Somewhat similar, frankly, to how we look at the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. Based on that calculation, we'll determine whether you keep it the rate at 0.8 or whether you drop it to 0.7 or 0.6 or 0.5. Again, you can never go above 1%. And if you had to, then the Secretary of Labor would have to lower the percentage. The Secretary of Labor would have the power. They would do this once a year, and hopefully it only needs to change once a year. But if there seemed to be excess draws from the fund that threatened the stability of the fund, the Secretary of Labor could lower the rates or could lower the benefits, the percentage of pay even more to ensure that the trust fund that's been created here remains stable and sufficient. So,
Rick, let me ask you this real quick as a quick follow-up, and I want to move on to some other questions. But will the benefit always be pegged to the Social Security maximum, or is there a different indice? What's the metric that would be used?
The benefit, the $900 maximum benefit, which basically, is someone up to about $58,000. The $900 weekly benefit would go up by inflation. I think it's a year or two after the bill takes effect. It'll be tied to the CPI, so that 900 would become 930, would become 950, whatever over time. But again, if the tax weren't sufficient to fund that level of benefit, then that number would come down. So
appreciate that. Okay, Albert, let's go to you. Governor mentioned this in his State of the State address. There's some other concerns that have been expressed, and some which I know have been brought directly to you. What are some of the criteria that companies will have to meet in order to opt out under the state program?
Well, good morning, everybody. And again, thank you for having me, and thank you to all the panelists who are participating today. So yes, the governor did mention this in his State of the State, and I think for a number of the reasons that the senator described at the beginning, that's the motivation behind his support here. As far as the specific pieces that would be considered a comparable plan, I think what the Department of Labor will be looking for, and this is ultimately a policy that the Department of Labor will be implementing as far as the decision on what plans are considered comparable and which ones are not. I think the main components of the plans that are described in the law are the most important ones. So the length of leave, the percentage or the amount of funding or salary that the employee will take while on leave, and the eligibility criteria as far as when they are able to claim the leave are all going to be very important points. I think where you get into maybe a little bit of a gray area is plans that are more generous in one place but less generous in another than what's described. For example, a company who would provide leave that is maybe not quite as many weeks, but at 100% of the employee's pay. Those are the conversations that I think the employer and the Department of Labor are going to have to work through as far as what would be considered comparable. And I know that Secretary Hubbard is putting in place the staff and the resources to be able to have those conversations.
Thank you, Albert. A follow-up, Karryl, we're going to put you on the hot seat here in a second, but Albert, as a follow-up, and because this has been raised a couple of times, so how have you thought about this and communicated this in conversations with Senator McBride, perhaps others in Department of Labor, et cetera, but companies that have different types of employees, exempt, non-exempt, contract, et cetera. How will those differences be sorted out?
Sure. So I think for exempt and non-exempt employees, the intent is to have them be covered and be eligible under the program. Contractors are a little bit different. What we have been discussing and the intent of the bill is that contractors, particularly those that are maybe sole proprietors, are not going to be covered in a company's headcount for purposes of this. They would either be a sole contractor, and in that case, they would fall under the 10 employee or the 25 employee threshold for eligibility based on their own business. If they are a contractor that is part of a larger firm, if they are part of a business that has 10 or more employees or 25 or more employees, then they would qualify, but under their own eligibility as opposed to any contracts that they have with an outside business. So contractors are a little bit different, but exempt and non-exempt as far as the full-time or part-time employees go, as long as they meet the other eligibility thresholds. Again, FMLA, very consistent with the FMLA, a year, 1,250 hours. Those would be the factors that would determine eligibility.
So one quick question and another question, and Albert, and then I'm going to ask Jackie Poquette if she wants to reflect on anything she's heard so far. What about can there be a hybrid situation? So say you're an employer and you want to divide, you want to put some people, don't know if anybody would do this, but you want to put, let's say you want to put some people in a private plan, put some people in this plan, if it were to become public law. Is there the potential for kind of doing kind of a hybrid kind of a situation?
That wasn't what we were envisioning when we were putting this together. The idea was that at the entity level, that the business would either have a private plan and an opt-out from the state, or they would participate in the state plan so that all the employees would either be in one or the other. I haven't heard any employers say that that'd be something that they would be interested in. But as far as what was in mind when the substitute was drafted, it was not a mix and match between private and state.
Okay, thank you. Jackie, any reactions or do you have any quick follow-ups to anything you've heard? If not, we could keep moving, but I don't know if you want to come off mute for a second, if you heard anything that you'd like to kind of follow up on.
Absolutely. As an employer who wishes to implement a comprehensive paid leave policy that meets not only my employees' needs, but our needs, I want to offer paid parental and caregiving arrangements and benefits. But I want those benefits to include non-traditional working arrangements that actually create a better work-life balance than that provided by the Act. So what I'm saying is, as a result of the implementation of that policy, if I seek to opt out, I want to be assured that my ability to opt out, the totality of all the benefits offered are taken into consideration, and not just the time of available leave and percentage of wages. And that we have a say in that when the criteria is developed.
Okay. Thank you for that. Secretary Hubbard, I'm going to turn to you next. If you want to come off mute. So awful lot of this is coming your way. For once, Secretary Geisenberger got the better end of the deal. I'm kidding. If this were to become public law, this is something that would largely fall into the your Department of Labor's lap. How are you going to organize, or what steps would you take to organize, real quick? And then I've got a question here about if, and again, Karryl, it'd be wonderful if we could, if this did become law, that we had maybe a session with the department and the group that's assembled here today, the viewers, because there'll be a lot of implementation questions that would, I think, be important to think out and talk about aloud before policies and regulations are made. But because one that came up is, what if an employee works for an employer for some period of time in a calendar year, accumulates time, and that eligible employee leaves and goes to work for another employer? How will that time be counted toward eligibility? And where does the 1,250 hour clock start, stop? How's that going to get sorted out?
Sure. Well, thank you. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk about the bill today. We have had several conversations with the senator, and we are very grateful for some of the modifications that are in this substitute that we believe will make implementation more workable. Let me just go specifically to your question. Right now, if an eligible employee were to leave that job, they would not be porting that benefit over to the new employer. So they would then begin the clock for the 1,250 hours with that new employer. So that previous time would not be counted. They would start again with the new employer. And then I believe you asked also about how we would organize ourselves. As you know, in the bill, a new division would be created. We see it very similar in some ways in terms of implementation, the way we do unemployment insurance. We've kind of drawn on that model. We believe, we need to staff pretty immediately to begin the process, and would, at a minimum, have a director, regulatory specialists, accounting staff, and training and educators. Training and educating employers is going to be a critical piece. So outreach, education, especially for those employers who currently do not do FMLA. For us, a big step moving forward was being able to anchor some of the eligibility criteria with the existing rubric around FMLA. So, many of our employers are all going to be accustomed to that. Some of the smaller employers, not so much. So we envision spending a number of hours, a number of resources in terms of outreach to bring those employers along and up to speed on what those requirements are. We know that we'll also need information technology resources and contractual support to get new automation up and running. We have a significant amount of lead time here. So, once, this bill were to pass, we would begin immediately trying to, develop a timeline and strategy for implementation. It is our intent to automate this process as much as possible and make it less burdensome for employers. Hopefully we'll be submitting electronic paperwork back and forth and not having a more manual process put in place. So, again, we know, again, regulatory specialists, we know that we will need to do rulemaking, and we'll be working with a number of stakeholders in coming up with a regulatory schematic for implementation of this bill. We are working with other states. We've been sitting down with them to get advice, counsel, suggestions on what their processes are in their state, And there is quite a bit of history being made in terms of implementation and how this can be a successful program in many states. And so, we know this is going to be, the regulatory process is a back and forth and a conversation that we would look forward to having with Mike, your group, to get their input.
Appreciate that, Karryl. Thank you. Because we will have probably, I can imagine if this were to become public law, that there'd be an awful lot of scenarios, some that have been articulated today, others that, I just think maybe haven't, all of us, and I don't mean this in any pejorative way, but, just can't think of every twist and turn, but I think there'll be a lot of thought that will come up. So Senator, I'm going to pivot back to you for a moment on 2 points. One, anything you want to add in reflection to some of the things that have been said. And then second, talk about addressing the needs of small businesses. We got a question, especially those with more than 10 employees who are concerned that this is going to add more cost to businesses. And the time off is coming, or could come at a time, probably will never come at a time. How do we differentiate between the needs of a smaller business with, as the question suggests, 20 employees versus a larger employer in the state, like a large bank, a hospital system, etc.? What are some of the things that you want to talk about that are addressing some of those obvious differences?
Sure. So I think on the first question, I just wanted to briefly dive into the private plan opt-out, because I think there have been a number of questions around that in the chat as well, just to clarify. So to first build off of what Albert said, so an employer, the universe that would be eligible for the state benefit, right? So those workers who work for you, who've worked for a year, work for 1,250 hours, you would have to opt out or participate in whole or in part for that universe. But you could do it just for the medical leave, just for the family caregiving leave, just for the parental leave. So you could sort of mix and match the state plan with private plans, depending on the area of life covered. But sort of that universe of workers would have to opt out in whole or in whole to this from the state program for those individual parts, just to sort of help clarify that. On the small business point, the most significant changes that we have made to this legislation, and frankly, the most unprecedented changes that we've made, have been in response to the feedback and requests we've gotten from small and medium-sized employers. So as I mentioned before, every other one of the 9 states plus DC that have this policy apply this benefit to employers of every size. We have excluded employers under 10 for parental leave and employers under 25 for family caregiving and medical leave. And again, just to reiterate, those numbers would be determined by the employees who are or will be eligible for this benefit. So the number doesn't include part-time or seasonal workers. As Albert mentioned, it doesn't include 1099 workers. It would only include those who are or will be eligible for the benefit in determining that head count. That also reinforces the fact that this isn't a one-size-fits-all proposal. Recognizing some of those unique needs that those smaller businesses have. A couple of the other changes that we made in response to the feedback, particularly from smaller employers, is we dramatically reduced the family caregiving and medical leave. The medical leave is by far the most common leave that employees take. And so by reducing that leave length from 12 weeks annually to 6 weeks in a 2-year period, will dramatically reduce the amount of leave that an employee could take under this proposal. Another component, and I mentioned some of the stats about small businesses and medium-sized businesses in other states saying that this is actually a benefit to them in terms of reducing costs, and either results in a no impact on their bottom line or a positive impact on their bottom line. That's partly because a lot of small and medium-sized employers, they might not have formal policies in place, but an employee comes to them and says, I've been diagnosed with cancer. I need to get radiation and chemotherapy. Small, medium-sized businesses, they're like families. And in many cases, they'll say, you know what, we don't have a technical policy in place, but I'm just going to continue to pay your wages out. or at least a portion of your wages out, because you need to pay your rent, you need to put food on the table, but you also need to get life-saving care. This program provides a wage replacement so that the business is able to then retain the wage that they would otherwise feel sort of a personal obligation to pay their employee to do what they see fit with it, whether that's saving that money or utilizing it to compensate for the absence. Additionally, there's a really, I think, thorough academic study of New York's paid family and medical leave program. And what it found was that for employers 10 to 99 employees, their paid leave program actually made it easier for those employers to deal with employee leave. And that reinforces, I think, an important fact that I'll close on when it comes to small and medium-sized businesses, which is that beyond current legal requirements around FMLA, we know these life events are happening no matter what. And employers are forced to grapple with these life events when an employee faces them. And when you actually look at the data from the US Department of Labor's 2018 Fmla survey, it looked at the entire workforce and it compared paid leave states versus non-paid leave states. And what that survey found, and I know this is the main concern that folks have, is around increased absences. What that survey found was that when you compare paid leave states to non-paid leave states, the same percentage of the workforce took leave for these different life events. What they also found was the difference between paid leave states and non-paid leave states when it came to the length of leave that folks was taking was pretty small. It was about a 2-day increase in paid leave states versus non-paid leave states in the length of leave taken. The only meaningful difference between non-paid leave states and paid leave states was that workers in paid leave states were more likely to report that they received some or all of their income while they were out on leave, which demonstrates that these life events are happening. People are taking the time that they need to grapple with these life events, whether they live in paid leave states or not, but they're not getting financial support when they do it. And the businesses aren't getting financial support when they do it. And so this doesn't necessarily increase leave or increase absences. It just increases the support for folks when they hit hard times. And so I think as we're talking about this legislation, we've very much incorporated the small business feedback, but we're also able to benefit from those experiences in other states, from the data that we have nationally, to show that this is not going to be a burden on businesses. And if anything, it'll actually be a support system that will help workers and businesses alike.
Thank you for that. Secretary Geisenberger, I'm going to go to some of the questions that I think were in the chat. And I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, folks. There are 23 at this point, but I'm going to try to get through a few of them. So I'd ask the panelists to be mindful of that.
If I can just build while you're looking for that on something that the senator said, which I think makes us very different from every other state that's offering this, is that we have tied this to the current requirement under the FMLA, the Federal Family Medical Leave Act, which applies to every employer above 50, that you have to be with your employer for a year and 1,250 hours. In most other states, they've made this much more of a portable benefit. New person comes to work for you. They work for a few weeks, maybe a month or two, tell you, oh, by the way, you know, my wife's having a child, give me 12 weeks. That's not going to happen here. These are people who are going to have been with you for a full year, 1,250 hours. They would be eligible for this for leave anyway under the federal medical FMLA if you had more than 50 people. This just creates a mechanism to ensure that they also have income to supplement that leave. So I think that's going to be a big difference. And in response to one of the questions that I saw in here, which is probably the one you're going to ask me about, you know, why is our rate different than other states? You're going to be able to find different states that have different rates. We have looked at all 10 of these states. The 0.8% rate is a starting rate. We will see how much it raises based upon how many folks have comparable plans, how many, and therefore aren't subject to it at all. And there'll be an adjustment. It could well be that 0.8% rate after a couple of years does drop to 0.4. It wouldn't entirely shock me given, that we've put in, as the senator and I have talked about this, given that we've put in this 1,250 hour requirement and full year requirement, which goes way beyond any other state in the country, we may well see those rates come down, but we want to be sure that when we start, that we've collected enough money to be able to pay the benefits in the first year. If after this first year we discover that the benefits ended up being a lot lower, which again, we might expect that given that we have a higher threshold to become eligible, I suspect that rate would come down, but we're certainly at 0.8, well within the range of what we're seeing in every other state in the country. There are states, there was one state that was as high as 1.3%. I think they dropped it to 1.1% this year. But
so Rick, let me jump in. Let me ask real quick, because there's a couple I want to get through here quick. So we'll kind of keep this as lightning round, if you will. So New York State paid leave is at 0.511, and employee pays the total cost of the benefit. Why is Delaware high, and why not have the employee pay total cost of the benefit?
I think I answered the first part because that's the actual question I was trying to be responsive to.
Okay.
That 0.8% was developed based on the initial bill, some initial analysis, but I don't think we're going to know until we know which companies opt in and which companies opt out and which companies have comparable plans. You know, what we've said is we're going to start it at 0.8 and adjust it based on what the actual experience is. It looks like the senator wants to jump in. And
I'll just add, because I've gotten that question about New York before, and I just want to clarify that 0.51% for New York, that's just for their paid family leave program. They've had short-term disability, state medical leave insurance program for decades in New York. And so that 0.5 is actually just for their family leave. So it's actually higher than our family leave rate. And then on top of that, they also have to pay a medical leave rate. And that is actually not entirely on the employee.
so I think it's not apples to apples comparison. There's no state that is exactly like what we've proposed. So as far as the share and the split, I think it was just, you know, I can ask the sponsor, but you know, it seemed fair to split it 50-50. You know, there's certainly nothing that stops an employer from opting to pay more than that. You know,
Great.
And I will just say early on the request, sorry, Mike, early on the request that I got from a number of business owners was, don't put this entirely on us, which is how it is for unemployment insurance in Delaware. And so this was an effort to try to strike that balance at the request of business owners who asked me, don't make this 100% on us like UI is in Delaware.
And there are some states where 60-70% is on the employer and only 30-40. So 50-50 is actually, you know, again, on the more business friendly side of the ones that are out there.
Right. Secretary Hubbard, let's go to you real quick. Are there criteria that determine an employee's eligibility? Is there documentation the employee needs to complete? How is it determined what amount an employee is paid per week? Do part-time employees qualify for full time weekly benefits?
You're on mute.
Okay, that was quite a few questions, Mike, but I do we'll answer them in turn. I think you wanted to know a little bit about documentation that's going to be required. You know, we tied this to FMLA for a reason. The employer will have an opportunity to do the initial determination of eligibility, and I envision that we would utilize the forms that are currently part of the FMLA certification process. And so those with 50 and over are familiar with that process, where an individual has to have a statement from a medical provider about the need for the leave. Some show some documentation around the relationship, whether it's the spouse, child, if they're doing a caregiving leave certification. So we envision using documentation very similar to that. Can you repeat some of those other, Mike?
Yeah, one more part, and then we're going to have to. So let me also say, very quick programming note. Karryl, let me just do this. it's 9:56, and recognizing everybody set aside an hour, we could be here another hour for sure. And there's a lot to unpack here. For my panelists, I'd ask that you look through the chat, if you wouldn't mind taking some time and responding to as many of those questions as you possibly can. I think the participants today would be grateful for your responses, and I would be personally grateful if you would take the time to look through that and shed some light. We're just simply not going to be able to get to all the questions today. That's why, Karryl, I want to put you on the spot to agree to we do a follow-up kind of a presentation at some point.
Oh,
Like, I assume you can, I'm not sure how to copy all these, but I assume you guys have a record of them and can forward them to us to figure out.
We'll figure that out. Somebody smarter than me. Jackie, I want to go to you first for kind of just any other last observations, reactions, and then closing comment, and then we'll kind of go ask everybody for a quick closing comment. So Jackie, go ahead.
Thank you. I just, want to emphasize that what SHRM and HR professionals are looking for is the flexibility part. And that is what is important to us. We are, as you know, in an acute labor shortage and increasingly trying to keep a healthy work-life balance, and by a paid leave and someone out for an extended period of time, the options that used to be of either a temporary employee or divvying up their work is no longer available. So we are trying to be as creative as possible to alternate non-traditional working arrangements, and allowing for that flexibility to remain without the mandate is crucial for us. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Jackie. Albert, closing thoughts, comments?
Well, I just wanted to again thank everybody for participating. Thank you, Mike, for pulling this together, and the team at the State Chamber and SHRM, and to thank my fellow panelists for their thoughts. I'd be happy to take a look at the questions that have come through. I did see a couple of people that were asking for like a takeaway document or a summary. We did put together a short summary. It's about 2 pages that I'd be happy to share, Mike, with you so that it can go out to everybody who participated. That gives a high-level overview, maybe answer some of the basic questions, and can certainly be something to reference what the high-level pieces of the substitute bill are. So I'm happy to send that over today. And then for the more detailed questions, if you could send them over, we'd be happy to take a look as well. But again, thank you for everyone to participate, and I appreciate the conversation.
Great. Secretary Geisenberger?
I'll just say ditto what Albert said and yield my time.
There you go. Secretary Hubbard?
I echo those comments. Be happy to respond to all the questions that were raised in the Q&A and chat, as well as participate in the future if you have additional forums like this.
Very good. And before I go to Senator McBride, I just want to again thank Blackwell HR Solutions for their sponsorship today. I want to thank Jackie and Kristen and everybody associated with SHRM for partnering with us on this program. Senator, it's a complicated topic. Your final thoughts and reflections.
Sure. Well, I want to reiterate everyone's thanks to you and the Chamber and DelMarVa SHRM and everyone who's joined today for this conversation. Obviously, this is a conversation that's ongoing, that will continue even after passage of the legislation. This legislation will not go into effect until 2025, 2026. So there will be time for that education and for those conversations to continue. But I think ultimately what I would say is that I believe the solution we have in front of us is a compromise solution. And I think one of the things we pride ourselves in Delaware on is working across our differences, listening to all stakeholders, And I believe that this legislation really reflects that measured, balanced approach. And I appreciate everyone who's engaged in those conversations over the last year and who continue to engage in good faith in those conversations as we move forward. Obviously, no one gets everything they want in a compromise, certainly myself included. But I think we should celebrate at a time where so often we can't cross our differences, reach across our differences. That we've, I think, come up with a solution that is a compromise and reflects that feedback and listen to the stakeholders.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to put up the SHRM code for those of you that are SHRM professionals and want to grab your continuing education credit. There are the codes there up on the screen. You might want to take a quick screenshot of that or jot those numbers down. I'm grateful and thank all the panelists, and I appreciate all the interest and participants and all the questions that came before this and ended up in the Q&A, but also others that will come subsequent to this. All very good. I mean, we need everybody thinking about this and providing helpful insights as discussions continue. So again, thanks to all the panelists. Thanks to our friends at SHRM. Again, thanks to Blackwell. All of the panelists, as I said, I very much appreciate all of your time. Members of the media, this was an on-the-record conversation. I'm Mike Quaranta from the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce. We've got other programming coming up. We're in the final steps of having a webinar like this with Philadelphia Federal Reserve President Pat Harker. Our annual dinner is April 4th, and look on our website for other programming. So thanks to everybody. Have a great day, and so long.